Arunachala Śrī Aruṇācala giriyuru vāhiya kirupai kaḍalē kirupaikūrn daruḻuvā Arunachala giriyuru vāhiya kirupai kaḍalē kirupaikūrn daruḻuvā Arunachala Arunachala Śrī Aruṇācala Śrī Aruṇācala Śrī Aruṇācala Arunachala Śrī Aruṇācala Śrī Aruṇācala Śrī Aruṇācala.
Namaskaram. That was Sadhu Om singing verse 17 of Akṣaramaṇamālai, which is the verse I'm going to be talking about today. On the surface, this verse is a very simple verse, but it actually has very deep meaning. What Bhagavan says in this verse is, giriyuru vāhiya kirupai kaḍalē kirupaikūrn daruḷuvāy Arunachala. That means Arunachala, ocean of grace, which is the form of a hill, being abundantly gracious, may you bestow grace. And if we slightly expand the meaning, that what it implies is Arunachala, who shine in the heart as the infinite ocean of grace or compassion, which is what is seen outside as the form of this great hill, being abundantly or intensely gracious or compassionate, may you bestow grace upon me in whatever way you wish, knowing it to be what is best for me. So to explain the verse, or the first part of the verse, word by word, giri is a Sanskrit word that means hill or mountain. Uru means form, and āhiya is an adjectival or relative participle, which means which is. So giriyuru vāhiya, or if you split it, giriyuru āhiya, means which is the form of a hill. Kirupai is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit word kripa, which means grace, compassion, kindness, tenderness, solicitude, or benevolence. And kaḍalē is a vocative or eighth case form of kaḍal, which means sea or ocean. So kirupai kaḍalē is an address to Arunachala as ocean of grace or compassion. Therefore, giriyuru vāhiya kirupai kaḍalē is an address to him as ocean of grace, which is the form of a hill. And by addressing him thus, Bhagavan implies that though in the gross outward-looking view of the mind, Arunachala appears in the physical form of a mountain of solid rock, he is actually an ocean of tender and compassionate grace, as can be seen only by an extremely subtle inward-looking awareness. Describing Arunachala as ocean which is the form of a hill is what is known in Tamil as Virod Alankaram. That's actually a word of Sanskrit origin. Viroda means what is an enemy or something opposing or contradictory, and alankaram means an adornment. It also means a literary adornment or a figure of speech. So virod alankaram literally means a conflicting, contradictory, or antithetical adornment. And it's a term that is used to describe an incongruous figure of speech, or what would be called a mixed metaphor in English. Though mixed metaphors often occur unintentionally and with awkward effect, Bhagavan deliberately used this mixed metaphor here to convey a very deep and subtle meaning. The nature of a mountain and the nature of an ocean are contrary in so many respects. A mountain is made of rock, which is solid and hard, whereas an ocean is made of water, which is fluid and soft. A mountain is unmoving, achala, unwavering, actionless and steady, whereas an ocean is constantly in motion, wavering, active and unsteady. A mountain is silent and orderly, whereas an ocean tends to be noisy and chaotic. Why then did Bhagavan use these seemingly contradictory metaphors to describe Arunachala and his grace? Arunachala and his grace are one, because grace is his very nature, as Bhagavan implies here by describing him as kirupai kaḍalē, the ocean of grace. So whatever may be said of Arunachala may equally well be said of his grace, and vice versa. Though he is actually beyond all qualities, from the perspective of ourself as ego, he combines within himself certain qualities similar to a mountain and certain qualities similar to an ocean, even in cases where their qualities are seemingly quite opposite. He can be said to be both solid and fluid, hard and soft, unmoving in his real nature, yet constantly moved by his love and compassion for all, actionless, yet constantly active in bestowing his grace, eternally silent, yet through his silence proclaiming the truth louder and more clearly than it could ever be conveyed in words. How can he combine within himself such contradictory qualities? Let us take, for example, his aruḻuvāy, the doing or action of his grace. Though it is described as a doing, sale, because it has a subtle yet tremendous effect on us, whether or to what extent we are aware of it or not, it is what Bhagavan would call doing without doing, because grace is the very nature of Arunachala. So the action of his grace, aruḻuvāy, happens by his merely being as he always actually is, without his ever doing anything. As Bhagavan says in the 15th paragraph of Nana, it all happens isan sanidana visesha matratal, by just or nothing more than the special nature of the presence of God. The presence of God means his being. So by his merely being as he is doing everything. So without doing anything, he is doing everything, is the implication. In this context, the primary idea behind the metaphorical use of the word ocean is to convey the sense of vastness and pervasiveness. But whereas the vastness and pervasiveness of a physical ocean is limited, being contained within boundaries, the vastness and pervasiveness of kirupai kaḍalē, the ocean of grace, is unbounded and therefore infinite, as Bhagavan indicates explicitly in verse 7 of Śrī Aruṇācala Akṣaramaṇamālai, which he concludes by saying, Ideya mandru aham achalama nadumidum aruṇācalā enum ele aruļuvāy kaḍalē. That means only the boundless ocean of the light of grace called Aruṇācalā, who dances motionlessly in the court of the heart. In the context of that verse, what this implies is that when we keenly investigate ourselves, the source from which we rose as ego, the thought called I, and when the dream of multiplicity thereby ceases to exist, what will then exist and shine is only the boundless or infinite ocean of the light of grace called Aruṇācalā. Aruṇācalā means Aruna hill. Malai is a Tamil word meaning hill. Who eternally dances motionlessly as I am only I in the court of the heart. So there Bhagavan says, he uses the word, to describe that ocean of the light of grace, he uses the adjective, or the adjectival, the relative clause, ele, which means boundless, or what is boundless, which is boundless, or boundless means infinite. So whereas a physical ocean has boundaries, has limits, the ocean of grace is without limits. It's the infinite whole. It's the very nature of Arunachala, the very nature of God. The metaphor ocean also implies something of tremendous power, a power that is potentially extremely destructive in its effect. Just as an ocean can kill and wreak havoc when its power is unleashed by a storm or a tsunami, when the full power of Arunachala enum elearum aruloli kadal, the boundless ocean of the light of grace called Arunachala, is unleashed, it will eradicate ego and thereby render everything else completely and eternally non-existent. As Bhagavan implies by addressing Arunachala in verse 27 of Akṣaramaṇamālai as Sakalamam Virungum Kadiroli Inam. That means the sun of bright light, that implies the light of grace, which is pure awareness, that swallows everything. So he's the son of bright light, but swallows everything. And he describes him in a similar way in the first verse of Arunachala Pancharatnam. Viri kadiral yabum virungum arunagiri paramatma vei. That means paramatma, arunagiri. So that means arunagiri is paramatma, who swallow everything by your spreading rays. By spreading rays, there implies the spreading rays of pure awareness. So like an ocean can swallow everything within itself. If the full power of an ocean is unleashed by a storm or by a whirlpool or any such phenomenon, the ocean can swallow everything. Like that, Arunachala is such a powerful ocean of grace, but by his grace, he will swallow ego and all of ego's progeny. In other words, this whole vast world of phenomena, everything will be swallowed. And what then remains shining in the heart is, as Bhagavan beautifully describes in verse 7 of Arunachala Ashtakam, Ideya Mandru, that means in the court of the heart. Court means like a king's court. In the court of the heart, aham, aham here means inside the court of the heart, achalama. Achalama means motionlessly and can also mean as a hill. It has two meanings. Nadamidam, dancing. So how is he dancing motionlessly in the court of the heart? He's always dancing as I am I. Arunachala, Aruna hill, Enum, which is called, that is the ocean of elearum aruloli kaḍalē. That means the boundless ocean of the light of grace. Kaḍalē means only that, so only that will remain shining when he swallows everything. So such is the nature of the grace of Arunachala. It destroys everything in order to restore us to our natural state of infinite happiness, of infinite being, infinite awareness, and infinite happiness, and infinite love. That's its real nature, and that's our real nature. So to restore us to that, it will destroy everything else. But by using these metaphors, Bhagavan is revealing it to us so much about the nature of grace. If we think deeply about what these metaphors imply, we can understand the real nature, what Bhagavan is teaching us about the real nature of grace. A physical ocean consists of water, and though water can seem soft and gentle to touch, it is extremely powerful. Even when its full power is not unleashed, given time, even a seemingly gentle flow or dripping of water can gradually erode and shape even the hardest of rocks. And the water of the ocean can gradually corrode iron, reducing it to a powder of dust. Likewise is the power of grace. Even when its full power is not yet unleashed, given time, it will gradually but unfailingly erode and shape the rock-like edifice of ego and its vasanas. Vasana means volitional inclinations, but they are the seeds that sprout as likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, fears, and so on. Reducing their density and thereby making way for the light of clarity to shine forth from within to illumine the mind with clear viveka, discernment, discrimination, or the ability to distinguish what is real from what is unreal, enabling us to recognize with steadily increasing clarity the unsatisfactory nature of whatever semblance of happiness we may have hitherto been seeking to obtain from vishayas, objects or phenomena of any kind whatsoever. Thus, grace gradually erodes all the iron-like defenses that we as ego have built around ourselves in the dark form of a dense fog of vishaya vasanas, inclinations to seek happiness in vishayas, thereby making us increasingly willing to surrender ourselves entirely by turning our entire attention back within to face ourselves alone. Only when grace has thereby made us sufficiently willing to surrender ourselves completely will its full power be unleashed, rising from within as the infinite clarity of pure awareness, thereby swallowing us forever within itself. Just as grace is comparable in these respects to the waters of an ocean, in other respects it is comparable to a mighty mountain. Like a mountain, it is hard, firm, and unrelenting, sometimes seeming to be harsh and unmerciful in its treatment of us, giving us the fruits of our past karmas in such a way that will be most conducive to our spiritual development, as if it did not care about all the suffering that we must inevitably undergo in experiencing those fruit, until we are willing to surrender ourselves entirely to it. Like a mountain, it is also steady and unmoving, existing and shining forever in our heart as our own immutable being, I am, unaffected by the turmoil of the mind that seemingly surrounds it, just as a mountain is not affected by a storm that rages around it. Most importantly of all, like a mountain, it is eternally silent, just being as it is without ever doing anything. Though it is steadily transforming us, working hard within us to rectify all our vasanas, and for that purpose, making us experience the most appropriate fruits for our past karmas, it does all this without ever actually doing anything, but just by the power of its mere being, which is itself infinite love. Therefore, though grace seems to do so much, its real nature is infinite silence, the silence of pure being, and it will reveal its silent nature to us only to the extent to which, by its silent power, we turn within and thereby surrender ourselves to it. As Bhagavan says in verse 27 of Upadesha Tanipakal, this is a very small verse, it is just a one-line verse, but it's very, very deep in meaning. What he says in that verse is, Monam ul erum oru mori arul nilaye. That means silence is the very nature of grace, the one language that rises within. What it implies is, silence is the very nature or actual state of grace, the one single, non-dual, unique, unequaled, and incomparable language that rises within, eternally surging forth as the clear light of pure awareness, I am, waiting to swallow the mind as soon as it turns back within. So by saying this, Bhagavan implies that the infinite silence of pure being, which is the very nature of both Arunachala and his grace, is the one and only real language, because it is our real nature, and therefore it alone has the power to reveal our real nature to us by drawing our attention back within, thereby making us know and be what we always actually are. That is, since our real nature, Atma-swarupa, is beyond the reach of thought or word, meaning that it cannot be grasped by the mind or expressed in words, as Bhagavan implies in the first Mangalam verse of Ulludunapadu, where he says, Ullaporul Ullalala Ullul Ara ullate ulladal. That means since the existing substance exists in the heart without thought, it cannot be reached by thought or word. In other words, it cannot be reached by anything other than itself. And since it is the silence of pure being, it can reveal itself only in and through that silence. That's why in that first Mangalam verse, Bhagavan says how to meditate upon it. Only to be as it is in the heart alone is meditating on it. So we can know it only by being it. And it can reveal itself to us only in that silence of pure being in which ego has subsided and remains in its true nature as pure being. In other words, it can reveal itself to us only by drawing us back within and thereby absorbing us back into its real state of pure silent being. Thoughts and words are the very antithesis of the silence of being, which is our real nature, because they can occur only in the state in which we have risen as ego, thereby seemingly forsaking our natural state of pure being. So it is only in the infinite silence in which all thoughts and words have ceased to exist, along with their root, namely ego, the first of all thoughts, that our real nature will shine forth as it is, as Bhagavan implies in verse 31 of Akṣaramaṇamālai. What he says in that verse is, Sukha kadal ponga chollu nabadanga summa porandidinga Arunachala. That means Arunachala. But the literal meaning is Arunachala, the ocean of joy to surge forth, speech and mind to subside, just settle down there, which implies Arunachala, so that the ocean of joy, your real nature, surges forth within me, and so that speech and mind thereby subside or cease completely, just silently, calmly, leisurely, motionlessly, or without activity. That's what summa implies. Summa porandidu. That means settle down or be seated, be majestically enthroned or be united with me. Implying be united with me as the silence of pure being. Angu. Angu means there, implying in my heart. Therefore, as Bhagavan says, monam ul erum orumori aruḻnilaye. Silence is the very nature of grace, the one language that rises within. This is why Arunachala, the infinite ocean of grace, kirupai kaḍalē, though all-pervading and ever-present, graciously shines in this physical world as the silent form of this great hill in order to attract our outward-looking mind towards it, like a magnet attracting iron, and thereby to silently and stealthily turn us back within to see its real nature shining in our heart as our own being, I am. That is, Arunachala is Mauna Swarupa, the one whose very nature is silence. So it is to reveal his real nature of silence, through silence, that he stands as a hill on earth. As Bhagavan explains in verse 2 of Śrī Aruṇācala Akṣaramaṇamālai. What Bhagavan says in this verse is, Kandava nevanena karutirul nada, Kandava nindrida nindradu kandain, Kandana nindrida karutera villai, Kandilan indrida karuteru marain, Vindidu Vilakidu Viraluruvona Vindile Panduni Vilakine Endral Vindida Dunnile Vilakida Vendre Vindala Machala Ma Vilangida Nindrai. What that means is Kandavan Evan Ena Karutidal Nada. When investigated within the mind to see who the seer is, Kandavan Indrida Nindradu Kandain. I saw what remained when the seer became non-existent. Kandanan endrida karutera ville. The mind does not rise to say, I saw. Kandilan endrida karuterumaru in. In what way could the mind rise to say, I did not see? That is, since it doesn't rise to say, I saw, how can it rise to say, I didn't see? Vindu idu vilakidu daruḻuvā vindu ile pandu ni vilakine endral. What that means is, who is the one who has the power to elucidate this by speaking, when in ancient times you elucidated it without speaking? And then he concludes the verse by saying, Vindidadu unnile vilakida vendre vintalam achalama vilakida nindrai. That means only to elucidate your state without speaking, you stood shining as a sky earth hill. That's the literal meaning. What this implies is, when the seer investigated within the mind to see who is the seer, I saw what remained when the seer thereby became non-existent. The mind does not rise to say, I saw. So in what way could the mind rise to say, I did not see? Who is the one who has the power to elucidate this by speaking, when in ancient times, even you, as Dakshinamurti, elucidated it without speaking, but only through your natural state of infinite silence? Only to elucidate your state of silent and motionless pure being, which is pure awareness, I am, without speaking, you stood shining as a hill, or shining motionlessly, extending from earth to sky, though actually beyond the limits of both. That's the implied meaning. So there Bhagavan is revealed why does Arunachala stand here as a hill? When he is the infinite and all-pervading ocean of grace, why does he stand as a hill on earth? It is to reveal through his silent presence, his real state of pure silent being. If we are drawn to him, he will turn our mind back within, and thereby we will know our real being, which is itself Arunachala. He's ever dancing in our heart as I, as Bhagavan says. So coming back to this verse of Akṣaramaṇamālai, verse 17, after addressing Arunachala as giriyuru āhiya, vāhiya, kirupai kaḍalē, ocean of grace, which is the form of a hill, Bhagavan then prays kirupaikūrn daruḻuvāy, which means being abundantly or intensely gracious, may you bestow grace, thereby implying that in accordance with his nature, the all-abundant ocean of grace, Arunachala should consume him in the fullness of his grace. That's the implication there. As explained earlier, kirupai is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit word kripa, which means grace, and kūrndu is an adverbial participle that means being abundant, excessive, or intense. So kirupaikūrndu is an adverbial clause that literally means grace being abundant, excessive, or intense, and that therefore implies being abundantly, excessively, or intensely gracious or compassionate. Aruḻuvāy is a second-person singular future form of the verb arul or arulu, which means to be gracious, to give graciously, or to bestow grace. So aruḻuvāy literally means you will bestow grace, or you will be gracious. But it is used here in the sense of the optative, aruḻuvāyaha. So it is in this sense, in this sense, it means, may you bestow grace, or may you be gracious. Therefore, this prayer, kirupai, kūrndu, aruḻuvāy, means being abundantly or intensely gracious, may you bestow your grace upon me. That's the implied meaning of this. When people pray to God, they generally pray to him to bestow his grace in a particular way, to fulfill a desire or to remove a difficulty. But praying to him in this way is foolish, because he alone knows what is truly good for us and for all concerned. And we are often mistaken in believing that a certain thing is good for us or for those we care about. That is, how are we to judge what is truly good for us? He alone knows what is truly good for us. So us telling him, I need this, I need that, give me this, give me that, that is foolish. Our only prayer should be, whatever you decide is good for me, you do that. Therefore, by praying to Arunachala in this verse to bestow his grace, without asking him to bestow it in any particular way, Bhagavan is by implication teaching us that whenever we pray, we should pray to him to bestow his grace in any way he wishes, knowing that what he wishes alone is what is ultimately good for us. As he implies in verse 2 of Śrī Aruṇācala Padacchēdam, when he sings, Ninishtam enishtam, your will, your ishtam, ishtam means will, wish, desire, or liking. So your ishtam is my ishtam. Imbadaku, that is happiness for me. The implication of that is your will is my will. That means I have no will of my own. I surrender my will entirely to you. May your will alone be done. So as Bhagavan implies by praying this, true prayer is not asking God for this or that, but only surrendering our own will entirely, knowing that his will alone is what is truly good for us. If at all we're to pray for anything specific, it should only be for ever-increasing love for him, as he teaches us to pray in verse 7 of Śrī Aruṇācala Akṣaramaṇamālai. He concludes this verse by saying, Ennam eduvō adu sevai. Whatever be your thought, or whatever be your wish, do that. Kaḍalē. Kaḍalē means, literally means eye, my eye. Eye means the organ of sight. So that's a metaphor for, it's a metaphor that means both my most beloved. That is, if somebody is very beloved to you, they're more precious to you than your own eyes. So my eye is a way of addressing someone as being very, very most beloved, or even more beloved than one's own eyes. Like Lord Shiva was so beloved to Saint Kanapa, but Kanapa was ready to pluck out his own eyes for Lord Shiva. So that is the implication of that addressing Arunachala as kaḍalē, my eye, might imply my eye, my most beloved. It also, is also a metaphor for awareness, so it also means my own awareness. But then the main prayer is Undran karalineil kaḍal perukai taruvāy. Undran karalineil means for your pair of feet. It literally means in your pair of feet, but in English we'd say for your pair of feet. Kaḍal, love. Perukai, only a flood. Taruvāy, just give me only a flood of love for your pair of feet. Flood here implies an overflow, fullness, abundance, surge, or increasing intensity of love for your pair of feet. So in that verse 7 of Arunachala Akṣaramaṇamālai, I quoted it while discussing one of the earlier verses of Akṣaramaṇamālai. That's a verse of complete surrender. And Bhagavan ends it with these words, Ennam eduvō adu sevai. Whatever be your thought, whatever be your wish, adu sevai, do that. Kaḍalē, my beloved. Undran karalineil kaḍal perukai taruvāy. Just give me only a flood of love for your pair of feet. If at all we are to pray for anything specific, we should pray only for that love, because but when he gives us love for himself, he is thereby saving us, because only by the love for him, that is given by him, will we be willing to surrender ourselves? And only when we are willing to surrender ourselves can we be restored to our own real nature, which is infinite happiness. So having love for him is the greatest of all blessings. And that is what he wants to give us. So praying to him for that is not going against his will. It is, we can be one thing, we can be sure he always wants to give us ever-increasing love for him. So we can never go wrong by praying for love for him. When Bhagavan prays in this verse, kirupaikūrn daruḻuvāy, being abundantly gracious, may you bestow your grace upon me, he is by implication praying for love, because grace is the infinite love that Arunachala has for us as himself. That is, since Arunachala alone is what actually exists, he is what we actually are. So he does not know us as anything other than himself. And hence he loves us as himself. Infinite love is therefore his very nature. So he and his love are one, as Bhagavan implies by describing him as amburu, the form of love. Amburu is a fusion of two words. Ambu, which means love, uru means form. So amburu means form of love. Bhagavan uses this term form of love in verse 101 of Akṣaramaṇamālai, in which he prays to Arunachala, Ambu pol amburu vunilene anbai kare tarul Arunachala. That means, like ice in water, melt me as love in you, the form of love. So there he's saying Arunachala is the form of love. That means Arunachala is love itself. And he also uses this same word. He begins verse 2 of Arunachala Padacchēdam with the words, Amburu Arunachala, Arunachala, the form of love. So Bhagavan, in both these places, Bhagavan is very clearly indicating that Arunachala is love itself. That is, he and his love are not two different things. His love is himself. He is the love that he has for us. And hence the infinite love that is himself is what we experience as his grace. Therefore, aruḻuvāy, may you bestow your grace upon me, or may you give me your grace, implies, may you graciously bestow your love on me. May you graciously give me the same love for you that you have for me. Or in other words, may you graciously enable me to love you as myself, just as you love me as yourself. So that is though Bhagavan uses very simple words, if we think about them deeply, there's so much very deep implication in these words. So whenever Bhagavan prays for grace, he's praying for love. And that love is nothing other than Arunachala himself. So it's also praying for Arunachala. But how can Arunachala give himself to us? We have to be willing to give ourselves to him. By our giving ourselves to him, he gives us himself to us. That is, it is our rising as ego, but seemingly separates ourselves from us from him, because he is ever our real nature. He is ever what we actually are. But when we rise as ego, we seem to separate ourselves from him. So he's ever willing to give himself to us, because he is our own self. But in order for him to give himself to us, we need to be willing to give ourselves to him. In other words, we need to be willing to surrender this ego, because then only will our real nature shine forth. Only when we remove this false awareness of ourselves, as I am this little person called Michael or whoever, can we know our real nature. What we actually are is only that infinite pure awareness that is ever shining in our heart as I am. So as Bhagavan often said, our real identity is not I am this or I am that. It is only I am I. So that is what Arunachala can reveal, that only when we give ourselves to him. And we can give ourselves to him only when he gives us all-consuming love for him. So that is what Bhagavan means when he prays for his love, for his grace. That is, his grace is his love. and that love alone is the means by which we can give ourselves to him, thereby enabling him to give himself to us. So, as Bhagavan said, grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's grace that brings us to this path. It's grace that removes all the obstacles on the way. And it is grace that will finally swallow us. And that grace is Arunachala himself. That grace is Bhagavan himself. Since Arunachala is the real nature of ourself, Atma-swarupa, and since grace is his very nature, his grace is not anything other than ourself, but is ourself as we actually are. Therefore, when we pray to him to bestow his grace on us, we are actually praying to him to restore us to our own real nature, or in other words, to transform us from this unreal ego nature back into what we always actually are, namely himself. By rising as ego, we seemingly separate ourselves from our own real nature. So Arunachala in his grace seemed to be other than ourselves, and hence we pray to him to give us his grace, as if it was something that we are now lacking. However, since his grace is himself, and since he is the one infinite whole, we are actually always fully immersed in his grace, as his grace, and can never be separated from it. Nevertheless, in the limited and distorted view of ourself as ego, grace seems to be separate from us and therefore limited. So as ego, we can never experience it as the infinite whole that it actually is. In order to experience it as it actually is, therefore, we need to experience it not as something other than ourself, but as our own very self, our real nature. This is the significance and implication of the adverbial clause kirupaikūrndu, being abundantly gracious, being excessively gracious, or being intensely gracious. His grace is always infinitely abundant and intense, but we fail to see it as such so long as we see it as other than ourselves. So kirupaikūrndu, being abundantly gracious, implies that his grace should shine in our heart in such a way that we are able to recognize its infinitely abundant nature by seeing it as nothing other than our own being, I am. As Bhagavan often used to say, grace is the infinite and eternal light of pure awareness, which is always shining in us as I am, which is always shining as I am in the hearts of all sentient beings, jivas. Since it is the original light that illumines the mind, enabling the mind to know other things, and since all other things, including all time and space, exist and shine only in the light of the mind, which is a dim reflection of this original light of pure awareness, I am, it is infinite, eternal, and all-pervading, and hence Bhagavan describes it in this verse as kirupai, the ocean of grace. Being all-pervading and therefore omnipresent, it shines equally, impartially, and without any distinctions in all times, in all places, and in all jivas, irrespective of their state of mind, whether it be low or high, impure or pure. And hence he describes it as Kiamel Engum Killaroli Money, gem of light that shines above, below, and everywhere, in the next verse, namely verse 18. What he sings in verse 18 is Kiamel Engum Killaroli Maniyen Kirmeye Parse Arunachala. Kiamel Engum Killaroli Mani means gem of light, but shines, literally means that shines below, above, and everywhere. En Kirmeye Parse means annihilate my lowness, my baseness. A parse means make it void, make it non-existent. So completely eradicate or annihilate my lowness, my baseness. So what Bhagavan implies in this verse is Arunachala, gem of light. That is the infinitely precious light of pure awareness. Why does he call it a gem? Because it's infinitely precious. There's nothing more precious than this light of pure awareness, I am, which is Arunachala, but shines below, above, and everywhere. That is, but shines within me at all times and in all states, whether my mind is in a low state of impurity and immaturity or in an elevated state of purity and maturity. So by kir below and male above, he's not just talking about below and above in terms of space. He's talking about in the low state of mind and in the high state of mind. Whatever be our state of mind, in all states of mind, engum, everywhere, at all times, in all places, he is ever shining in us, because he is that light of pure awareness, I am, but is ever shining within us. And that is the light of grace. So, enkirmeye parse, since you are that light, it's for you to annihilate my baseness. The implication is, by drawing my mind inwards to see you as you actually are, annihilate my baseness. My baseness means the darkness of my self-ignorance, which is what rises as ego, the false awareness, I am this body. So it's a beautiful, beautiful prayer. So we'll talk about it more next time. Just as an ocean will accept and absorb into itself all rivers and streams that flow into it, no matter how clean or dirty they may be, Arunachala, the infinite ocean of grace, will bestow his abundant grace on every jiva who approaches him seeking it, and will thereby eventually absorb each of them into himself, no matter how pure or impure they may be. However, whereas the ocean will cleanse the water of the river by absorbing it into itself, as itself, Arunachala will first cleanse us by his grace and thereby absorb us into himself, as himself, because only when we are wholeheartedly willing to surrender ourselves entirely to him will he consume us. And we'll be wholeheartedly willing to surrender ourselves only when we have been cleansed to a considerable extent of the dirt of Vishaya vasanas, which cloud our mind with a dense fog of desires and attachments, thereby making us unwilling to surrender ourselves. So the ocean will absorb the river and thereby purify it. Arunachala will first purify us and then absorb us. So it's only when we are fully ripe, fully willing to surrender ourselves, but he will be willing to accept us. Because he will swallow us, we will become food for him. So in order to offer ourselves as food for him, we need to be very pakva. Pakva means ripe, mature, or well cooked. We can't give him an unripe fruit or uncooked food. It must be well ripened, well cooked. So we must be, by his grace, we must be well cooked. Then only he will swallow us, take us as his bali, as he says in verse 10 of Arunachala Padacchēdam. He will accept us as bali. He says he will, that inuya, that sweet soul, he will accept as bali. Bali means the sacrificial offering. But we must be sweet. And to be sweet, we must be fully ripened, fully well cooked by his grace. Then only he will accept us and absorb us into himself. But when we approach him, doesn't matter how impure we may be, he will certainly purify us. Therefore, though Bhagavan does not specifically ask for anything other than grace in this verse, by the way he has carefully worded this prayer, he implies so much about the nature of grace, and hence about what he means by praying for grace. By addressing Arunachala as giriyuru, vāhiya, kirupai, kaḍalē, ocean of grace, which is the form of a hill, he implies that Arunachala is grace itself, the infinitely abundant fullness of grace. So in asking him to give him grace, he is implicitly asking him to give himself. However, since Arunachala is the one infinite whole, other than which nothing can exist, He cannot be anything other than ourself. So he is our own real nature, the pure awareness that shines eternally in our heart as our own being. Therefore, since his grace is always shining within us as I am, what is it that he is to give us that we do not already have? Though his grace is what is always shining within us as our own being, I am, we have not yet allowed it to consume us because we persistently turn our attention away from our being towards the appearance of other things. So in order to make us willing to surrender ourselves entirely to it, it needs to shine within us in a special manner, thereby drawing our attention back within to see it with unwavering love, like a magnet drawing a piece of iron towards itself. This shining within us in a special manner is what Bhagavan implies by praying kirupaikūrn daruḻuvāy Arunachala, being abundantly or intensely gracious, may you bestow your grace upon me. That is, though his grace is always shining clearly within us as our own fundamental awareness I am, it is nevertheless obscured by our rising as ego, the false awareness I am this body. So though we are always clearly aware of our being as I am, our real identity as nothing other than this being, I am I, is seemingly obscured by the false identity, I am this body. Therefore, in order to dispel this false identity, he needs to be abundantly gracious by drawing our attention back within to lovingly see him shining in our heart as our real identity, I am I. So this clear shining of himself in our heart as I am I is what Bhagavan implies by the adverbial clause kūrndu, being abundantly gracious. His clearly shining in our heart as our real identity, I am I, is what Bhagavan called aham spuripu or aham sparana, the clear shining of I. Though he is always clearly shining in our heart as I am I, we fail to see him as such so long as we continue looking away from ourselves towards other things. So in order to make us see him clearly shining in ourselves as ourself, I am I, he needs to draw us back to look deep and lovingly within ourselves. This is therefore what Bhagavan is implicitly praying for when he sings kirupaikūrn daruḻuvāy Arunachala. Arunachala, being abundantly or intensely gracious, may you bestow your grace upon me. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya.